Hi, Eason here, and welcome to Movie Friday, where I talk about movies that I might recommend that you watch or avoid for your Friday night, Saturday evening, or just your weekend viewing in general. Now, we haven't had a superhero movie come out in a while, which is kind of a first ever since the MCU started rolling, and so this week I have a movie for those of you who might be feeling a superhero-shaped gap in your movie experience. The movie that I will be talking about is the 2009 feature-length debut of director Peter Stebbing, who has only directed 2 movies before moving on to TV series. The movie that I am talking about, one of the deconstructions of the superhero genre, is Defendor. I kind of have a soft spot for movies that deconstruct superhero tropes in the way that they feature protagonists trying to act like comic book superheroes in worlds that do not follow comic book rules. Defendor is one such movie. It is the story of Arthur Poppington, played with finesse and to absolute perfection by Woody Harrelson, who by day is just a sort of mentally challenged regular citizen, but by night he transforms into the amateur superhero Defendor. Now, Defendor isn't just to keep the neighborhood safe kind of superhero. In fact, he is on a mission. He is out to destroy the big name behind all the crime in the city, the arch nemesis, if you will, the supervillain that has killed his mother, Captain Industry. Already you can see the makings of a superhero movie whereby a tragic backstory that the hero has ties him to the villain, gives him the motivation, gives him his quest, and his quest is to visit justice upon one that has wronged both him and continues to wrong the city that he lives in. However, things aren't quite as they seem because Arthur, our protagonist, isn't all there. You see, the movie opens up in a psychiatrist's office, the psychiatrist played by the talented Sandra Oh, who is actually there to determine if Arthur is mentally competent enough to stand trial after he has viciously assaulted and fucking beat the daylights out of a dry cleaner. Immediately after that, you switch back to the story of how we got there, and you are treated to how Arthur as Defendor works. By night, Arthur dresses up in his homemade costume, takes his interesting homemade arsenal made of a World War II trench club, a jar of angry wasps, and a bag of marbles to trip up the villains that he's facing, and goes to patrol the city looking out for accomplices of Captain Industry. Now, this immediately puts him in a situation where he inadvertently rescues a crack-addicted prostitute, Kat, played by Kat Dennings, from the clutches of corrupt cop Chuck Dooney, who is played as sleazily and as assholishly as possible by the talented Elias Koteas. Kat quickly points finger at the mob boss that she owes money to, Radovan Kurtzic, played by AC Anderson, as being Captain Industry in an attempt to get Arthur to take care of him. Arthur takes this to heart, and things start developing with the events spiraling out of control, going in directions that nobody involved could have predicted. Now, first things first, Defendor as a movie rests primarily on the shoulders of the performance delivered by Woody Harrelson, and what a performance it is. See, Woody Harrelson doesn't really portray Arthur as some insane, psychotic individual, which he really isn't. He's just not mentally mature enough to actually comprehend, or at least fully comprehend, what is going on. Instead, Harrelson plays Arthur and even Defendor with this childlike innocence. He plays him as a gentle giant who perceives things through the lenses of the comic books that he has been pretty much addicted to ever since his mother has disappeared. As a result of a man who has the mental capacity of a 10-year-old seeing the world through a comic book's lens, the situations that he gets into as Defendor plays into the discrepancy between what he sees and what the audience sees. As far as being a superhero goes, Defendor isn't exceptionally successful. He mainly manages to get the upper hand on the people that he attacks or people he perceives as working for Captain Industry, which is basically everyone he perceives as a criminal, because the people he's going up against are just so fucking confused as to what the hell is going on. I mean, you're a gangster doing a bunch of gangster shit on a street corner somewhere, and then suddenly this costumed bozo comes up at you. He delivers these convoluted, nonsensical one-liners that seem to be straight out of a badly written comic book, and then he throws a jar of bees at you. What the hell would you do? I mean, you as the audience are always painfully aware that Arthur is basically going up against fully armed thugs who are fully prepared to use those firearms against him with no armor, no proper weaponry, no special skills, in fact, nothing whatsoever apart from his imagination, his determination, and his sheer will. At that point, the movie kind of switches to a sort of meta-narrative in that you see Arthur as Defendor trying to impose his will upon the world, trying to seek justice for a wrong that has been done onto him and is being continued to be done on everyone around him. As he tries to impose his will upon the world, the fact that the world does not function as a comic book does means that the world in turn imposes its will upon him. This is the part where the movie handles the aspect of realism in what is essentially an even purer superhero flick than most superhero flicks, in that there are very realistic and very absolute constraints as to what Arthur can do and what he cannot do. I have to hand it to Peter Stebbing on this one because he succeeds in keeping Defendor from being an unabashed love letter to the superhero genre at any point. As much as Arthur may perceive himself as being invincible and completely unaffected by bullets when he's Defendor, because comic book heroes are invincible, let's fucking face it, he is basically just a man. In fact, whenever he goes up against opponents that could easily take him down, they do take him down, and there are a couple instances where Arthur is brought in by the police because what he's engaging with is vigilantism, which is illegal. In fact, the only reason why Arthur seems to have avoided being captured by the police for so long is revealed to be the fact that they feel sorry for him. For his part, Elias Koteas plays Chuck Dooney with as much sleaze as an actor can possibly inject into what is more or less your typical mob show corrupt cop type of character. His bewilderment at the fact that Arthur is, from his point of view, stupid enough to pull the stunts that he does is extremely joyful to watch, not to mention the one scene that has made to the trailers where Arthur kidnaps Chuck and ties him to a radiator and then tortures him by squeezing a lime into his eye, where he mocks the attempt with, "Oh no, not the lime juice." But all that aside, when push comes to shove, he can be very menacing, which is kind of a nice contrast to what Woody Harrelson does, because as Defendor, you can tell that Arthur perceives himself as very menacing, very dark and intimidating, but he just comes off as somewhat comical. Speaking of which, this movie is mostly advertised as being a comedy-heavy take, a parody on the superhero genre, if you will. But calling this movie a comedy in any way, shape, or form, it would be completely inaccurate. At its heart, Defendor is a drama centered around a single man fighting a one-man war that only he himself can perceive. I mean, yes, there is humor in watching a man dressed up in a silly homemade costume with a D on his chest made entirely of duct tape, trying to bring down a criminal empire that he really doesn't understand the dimensions of, let alone actually comprehend what it is. And some of the line deliveries by Woody Harrelson are excellent. Defendor's attempts at badass superhero talk is always funny, but the movie easily twists this around and takes the humor right out of the situation because it makes you painfully aware that what you are watching may seem funny at first, but what you're witnessing is basically a grown man with the mental capacity of a 10-year-old going up against a bunch of mobsters with nothing that could even give him the briefest hint of an edge against them, and he himself is completely unaware of the danger that he's in. Also played for drama, and now would be a good time to mention her, Kat Dennings does a wonderful job as a down-on-her-luck prostitute who is addicted to crack and initially just wanted to be a journalist, or, as Defendor likes putting it, to be like Lois Lane. In fact, Kat Dennings' character is kind of used to emphasize the primary conflict at the heart of Defendor, which is why I said it is kind of a purer superhero movie than most others. You see, the central conflict in Defendor is the fact that there is what the world is, and there is what the world ought to be according to Arthur. In the real world, Kat is a crack-addicted prostitute who initially may have wanted to be a journalist, but was just unlucky or sort of ill-equipped to face the challenges of the real world, so she fell from grace. But in Arthur's head, she is just an innocent who was caught in the crossfire, who has to become a journalist, who eventually inevitably will. The fact that these two realities don't really mesh does not deter Arthur, because he fully believes and he's fully committed to the thought that the world has to be something other than what it actually is. I mean, if that isn't the cornerstone of what a superhero is, I don't know what the fuck is. In keeping, however, a healthy distance between a traditional superhero film and a heavy drama, Defendor manages to split its time adequately between the time spent as Defendor and the time spent as Arthur. As a result of this, the movie has a somewhat even pacing, in that there are no scenes that linger on for too long, but then the movie doesn't really pick up speed and rush headlong into anything at any point. It keeps a steady rhythm throughout. This also kind of owes to the fact that whenever there's an action scene and whenever Arthur manages to get away from the situation that he himself mostly instigates, it is mostly down to either sheer dumb luck or by the skin of his teeth. And in that regard, the character of Paul Carter, the fireman who acts like a big brother to Arthur, played by Michael Kelly, sort of acts like an audience surrogate, in that the primary motivation of Paul is to take care of Arthur, and he's constantly worried that by playing dress up, he's going to get himself killed, and it is very easy for you as the audience to start thinking that it is nothing short of a sheer fucking miracle that he hasn't ended up dead yet. So I think a good summary of this movie would lie in a quote from Batman that was recently repeated in the CW crossover event Crisis on Infinite Earths. The world only makes sense when you force it to. This is presented as being the primary viewpoint, the main psychological launchpad of Batman, with whom Arthur's story shares many characteristics. And that is why I say that Defendor, in trying to deconstruct superhero tropes, becomes an even purer superhero flick, because it is just the war of one man trying to make the world as he thinks will be a better place. And that is in essence what Defendor is about. It is about one man trying to cope with an unimaginable loss, with an injustice that he perceives has been done onto him, with the best way that he knows how, which is to strike back, and strike back in as direct a manner as humanly possible. Whether or not this is actually a wise idea given the conditions under which this quest for justice is going to take place is a matter that's up for debate, which is kind of what Defendor is, the platform on which this debate is taking place. You know, you might say that it is the kind of movie that proves to be a little bit more thought-provoking than you initially surmised that it might. So let me not mince words. Defendor is one of my favorite superhero movies of all time, and it is, in my opinion, the best superhero deconstruction movie that I have seen so far. If you like superhero movies, you like deconstructions of superhero tropes, if you like movies that are self-aware just enough to inject as much realism as they can muster into their own narrative, I would definitely recommend Defendor. If you're in the market for a strange, somewhat quirky, at times maybe even humorous drama flick with an interesting setting, Defendor will work for you. In fact, if you are at all looking for a well-written, well-paced, well-acted movie with a nice enough story, good action scenes, then Defendor is for you. For myself, though, I'm just going to rest a little bit easier knowing that I have done my part in trying to spread awareness of this wonderful piece of cinema. Until next time, hope you have a great weekend. It's Eason. Peace out.